We've all been playing classic WoW. We've been having a grand old time. We've been trying to make our characters as powerful as we can. We've been trying to earn as much gold as we can to afford those epic mounts, or, in my case, any mount. But what's the best way to do that? Specifically, what's the best profession to do that? Today we're going to be looking at the professions, including the secondary ones, to judge which is the best. We'll be looking at 3 criteria to determine this: the economic performance of the profession, how much it helps your character in terms of power and utility, and how much fun it is. That last one is obviously going to be the most subjective of the bunch, but do remember, it's all sprinkled with opinion. Informed opinion, yes, but opinion nonetheless. And in each of these categories, we'll be keeping in mind how well it does in the short term and in the long term, because that will matter. Firstly, how about first aid? I've always been one of those people who thinks first aid is kind of a waste of time, an underpowered afterthought of a profession. I've really never used a bandage in my entire WoW career, but I do level it up because I've got that completionist attitude. But I don't make a single bandage that doesn't increase my first aid level, and when first aid is maxed, I never use it again. However, I recently ran Gnomeregan and witnessed firsthand my group's healer making use of first aid. I don't know if this was an efficient way to heal, but it seemed to save our lives a few times, and it meant she could continue to heal when out of mana. After viewing that, I've come to have a slightly better opinion of first aid. Perhaps it can be effective in a supplementary capacity, but still, bandages are a channeled usage, just like food is. But they also come with a debuff that prevents another bandage from being used for a minute. However, they can be used in combat, unlike food, as long as you're not getting hit. So there's more room for them to be used in a tight spot if you've got a stun, immobilize, or a CC handy. It'll be more useful for classes with limited healing ability, warriors or mages. First aid also gives you something else to do with your accumulated cloth, other than sell it, get bags made, or mail it to a tailor alt. First aid is not effective at earning gold. And as all bandages have the same effect, just at increasing power, it's not really that fun or interesting to use either. But what about fishing? Surely fishing is a high-quality profession. There are entire guilds dedicated to fishing. And you know what? I think it is pretty fun. But fun in a strange way. Obviously, it's not fun in an exciting way. You sit there, not moving, waiting as much as 20 seconds straight without doing anything before clicking, looting a thing, and doing it all over again. But fishing is just about the only thing in the game that you can do 100% effectively with just one hand. So it makes playing World of Warcraft a viable activity in all sorts of situations that it otherwise wouldn't be. Let's say you're out of town and you can't bring your desktop computer, of course, so you bring your old laptop you haven't used in years. It's not very good anymore. You certainly can't raid on it, but you can still fish. Or perhaps you want to play while watching some YouTube videos, or generally paying more attention to something else. Fishing is for you. Fish can be used for cooking and a little bit of alchemy, so its viability performance-wise is tied to those professions. For the most part, the fish for cooking are pretty forgettable beyond leveling up cooking, but fishing for alchemy is pretty good, as you can make some quite decent potions with them. Fishing can be very lucrative if you selectively fish for stone scale eels, oily blackmouth, winter squids, or maybe even deviate fish for the elixir of giant growth, or savory deviate delight for the fun cosmetic stuff. The last secondary profession is cooking. Cooking is a very important profession, not necessarily for the healing or mana restoring properties, as food and drink can be bought in loads of places, but for the food buffs you get. If you're raiding, doing dungeons, or otherwise trying to crank out as much power as you can, you'll want a food buff. Cooking goes hand in hand with fishing for the few fish that are useful, and those few fish are needed for some of the best food for each class. Like the grilled squid for these classes and specializations, nightfin soup for these ones, and sagefish delight for priests. The other best dishes don't require fishing, and these are the Run-Tum Tuber Surprise, Monster Omelet, and Dirge's Kicking Chimerack Chops. You could make some good money by selling these items to raiders who don't want to spend the time farming the materials. Cooking also pairs well with skinning, as both professions have many reagents that come from beast corpses, so you're knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone. I do think cooking is pretty fun in a casual way. You're going to naturally accumulate a lot of cooking materials through questing, so it's a nice little bonus to be able to level up your cooking skill and make some helpful food items whenever you stop back at town. However, as useful as the 3 professions I've mentioned so far can be, their value has to be decreased in comparison to the rest, because they are secondary professions. Anybody can do them. 100% of players can make their own grilled squid if they want to. The same thing cannot be said for other professions, which means that at least to some degree, there's less of a market for any given cooking or fishing item than there is for a blacksmithing or tailoring item. Of course, making your own grilled squid is something many players won't want to do, as everything comes with its opportunity costs, and many players would rather spend their time doing something else than fishing. So there is still a market, but the market is much more accessible to get into compared to the primary professions. Let's look at the gathering professions: skinning, herbalism, and mining. Each of these is attached to at least one other profession, and in mining's case, 2. So their viability is intertwined with their counterpart. But we can still judge them by themselves a little bit. If you really enjoy fighting things, or at least don't mind engaging in extra combat, then maybe skinning is for you. I personally try to avoid fighting, unless it's for a quest. It's not that I'm role-playing as a pacifist or anything, but that I really don't like mob grinding, and killing extra enemies than I need to isn't really a way I want to spend my time. It's less the combat that I enjoy, and more the exploration and questing and character progression. So I avoid combat where I can. Maybe this is part of the reason I main a class that has stealth. Herbalism and mining, on the other hand, don't necessarily require combat. Gathering nodes are frequently located right next to an enemy, but a lot of the time they're not. Between mining and herbalism, it depends on where you most often like to be, where you would like to go. Mining nodes are usually on mountainsides or hills or in caves. Herb nodes are usually in forested regions and by trees. So if you like the aesthetic of Searing Gorge, or if you like cave delving, go mining. If you like running through places like Ashenvale, go herbalism. Of course, herbs and ore deposits are everywhere, but I do notice fewer herbs in zones like the Searing Gorge or the Badlands. I also find the gameplay loop of herbalism and mining quite fun. As you're questing or running from one place to another, you keep an eye on your minimap, stopping each time you see a node. It breaks up the slow pace of travel with small rewards. These gathering professions can also be quite lucrative on their own. A lot of raid alchemists just buy their herbs from the auction house, and many people like to just take 2 gathering professions and make money that way. Before we move on to the final 6 professions, there's something we have to keep in mind while evaluating them: longevity. The longevity of your profession's creations is both a good and a bad thing. If the item you make is permanent, then it's really good for helping your character in terms of power and utility. But it's also generally not very good for gold making, because you can only sell that item to any given player once. The demand is ever shrinking. If the item you make is impermanent, then it's not so good for power or utility, as it only helps you out for a few minutes or hours, but it is generally good for gold making. There will always be a demand for it because the item is always getting used up and disappearing. All other things being equal, I would value gold making over player power, because with the gold you make from impermanent items, you can just buy the permanent items, and then continue making more gold. Tailoring and enchanting are kind of unique as far as primary professions go. For tailoring, every player can gather your profession's materials, and every player really wants your products, bags, making it quite easy to level up your profession and make money, at least in the beginning. But because bags are such an important commodity, it means there are a lot of tailors. And unlike the other gear-making professions, leatherworking and blacksmithing, tailoring doesn't have specializations to differentiate one tailor's ability from another. And because bags are permanent, it means they become less and less important the longer the game is out. Sure, people make alts, new players start playing, but tailors will always make bags faster than new players or alts need bags. Aside from bags and maybe cloaks, tailoring only really increases your power if you're a priest, warlock, or mage. But if you are one of those things, then it is super nice to be able to craft your own gear when you just can't find any worthwhile pants. The gameplay loop of tailoring is like skinning and leatherworking combined, which is to say, if you like killing stuff, then it's great. Cloth drops from humanoids, so running dungeons is a good way to gather materials. Enchanting is even more interesting than tailoring, as it provides its own materials through disenchanting. Only enchanters can disenchant. And I think it makes enchanting really fun, busting apart your old gear to provide bonuses for your new gear. Enchanting is also really helpful and overall has more long-term gain in the power it provides than something like tailoring. With enchanting, the recipes you learn never really become obsolete. With tailoring or leatherworking, once you make a piece of gear for yourself, any less powerful piece of gear becomes useless to you. This is only partially true for enchanting. If you've got the mats for 2 enchantments, you're obviously going to use the more powerful one, but the less powerful one will still provide a useful boost when you don't have those harder to find mats, even if it's just a small boost. But enchanting does come with a serious drawback. It's extremely expensive. Either you've got to destroy every green quality or higher item you find in order to level up your profession, and therefore receive far less money along the way because you're not selling those items on the auction house, or you've got to buy all the enchanting materials from the auction house. In reality, you'll probably have to do both. You might think, couldn't I just sell my enchantments to make up for the gold I'm losing from destroying items? Sadly, no. Generally, enchanting recipes are very demanding for the bonuses they provide, which means you'd have to charge a lot to get your money back. And the demand for enchanting just isn't there to make that viable. Most players don't have the gold to support buying enchantments when they need to save up for mounts and skills. And while you're leveling, enchantments aren't worth buying because any given piece of gear won't be with you for that long. But enchanters do make wands, which are highly sought after by casters and can make you a fair bit of gold. Leveling up enchanting can be an expensive and grueling process, but this changes at max level. By the time players are raiding and have bought their mounts and have all their skills, their supply of gold will only increase, and so will their desire for any marginal power gain. So at level 60, there's finally a market for enchantments. But that said, I do think enchanting is one of the coolest professions. It's also the most social. In classic WoW, there is no vellum. Enchantments must be applied directly to gear or not at all. So unlike the other professions which can utilize the auction house, enchanters must make all their sales and trades in person. Due to enchanting being an independent profession, it's usually paired with tailoring, the other independent profession. Leatherworking is really similar to tailoring, so I won't repeat myself there. It's mostly a gear production profession, this time for leather-wearing classes like druids and rogues. Later though, it can also make mail, so it's a really good pick for shamans and hunters who start off wearing leather and then move on to mail at level 40. Leatherworkers also get some enchanting-like gear buffs, which is a solid bonus. At high level, it splits into 3 subdomains: elemental, tribal, and dragon scale leatherworking. Of the 3, tribal is by far the most lucrative, with its ability to make the Devil Sore leggings, Wolf's Head helm, and the Corehound belt. But the high demand for these items means there are a lot of tribal leatherworkers. Guilds of them, actually. Depending on your server, it might be nearly impossible for you to actually craft those leggings because of the monopoly that the Devil Sore Mafia has over them. The Devil Sore Mafia is basically a group of coordinated leatherworkers who camp the Devil Sore in the Ungaro crater non-stop, so they're the only suppliers on the server and can keep the prices high. So unless you're part of the Mafia, you might actually make more money going elemental for the fire resistance gear. So leatherworking can make you a lot of money, but the market can also be a difficult one to get into. And there are only so many feral druids on a server to buy your stuff. Blacksmithing is the final gear profession, this time for mail and plate, so it's a good choice for paladins and warriors. Blacksmithing has the really useful perk of being able to create keys. Only rogues and blacksmiths can open locked chests. It's always a letdown to find a locked chest in a dungeon that no one can open. In these cases, you might wish you were a blacksmith. They also have sharpening stones to temporarily enhance weapons, but they do have a minor drawback. To be able to craft things, they need to be close to an anvil, so no crafting outside of towns. Blacksmithing has 2 major branches, armorsmithing and weaponsmithing. And weaponsmithing has 3 branches, axes, swords, and hammers. Armorsmithing has some good stuff for warriors focused on DPS, but axe smithing is probably the best for gold making. It's got Nightfall, that axe everyone is always talking about, as well as the Arcanite Reaper. Hammersmithing is good for PvP with the Hammer of the Titans. So blacksmithing really helps bolster your character and comes with some very nifty utility. Blacksmithing is really expensive, but if you manage to sell some of the best in slot items, it can also be really lucrative. Alchemy is a pretty darn cool profession. For the high-level recipes, you need to be at an alchemy lab, which is found inside Skullomance, and later one is inside Blackwing Lair. I find this adds a lot to the flavor of being an alchemist, but it also is a drawback. If you want to create raid flasks, you need to run Skullomance, or at least part of it. Nearly everything alchemy creates is a consumable, and some of them are pretty powerful consumables. What this means is alchemy is extremely good at making gold. There's no limit to how many potions people will buy. Who doesn't want health or mana potions? Another thing that makes alchemy so good is their transmutes. Only alchemists can create arcanite bars, which are needed for some of the best blacksmithing items. And transmutes have a 24-hour cooldown. So you're not only selling the required mats, you're selling your cooldown. Remember how I mentioned longevity? The best part about alchemy is that it's always relevant. As a blacksmith, your customers might get raid loot better than what you can make, and so no longer need your services. But as an alchemist, your creations are always wanted. Engineering is the final profession. I don't think any profession can match engineering in the sheer utility it provides to the player. It's filled with random gadgets that do all sorts of things. It's definitely the best profession for PvP. The big drawback with engineering is that most engineering items can only be used by other engineers, which limits how much money you can make off of it. Engineering has two specializations, Goblin and Gnome engineering. Goblin engineering includes a lot of bombs, but also rocket boots or rocket helmets, a portal to Everlook, and the Goblin Sapper charge. Gnomish engineering has a Shrink Ray, Mind Control helmets, a portal to Gadget Zan, and the Gnomish Battle Chicken. No matter which one you pick, you'll have a crazy amount of items you can use in combat to give you an edge. So then the appeal of engineering depends on how you like to play. Do you want more abilities? Do you want to make combat a little more complicated? Then engineering is probably a good pick. And despite the restrictions, they still can make really good money. They can make guns, ammo, and scopes that don't require engineering to use, and they make the best fishing lure in the game. And without a doubt, engineering is the most interesting profession due to its sheer variety of stuff it can make and unique effects its items have. So we've gone through all the professions. Now it's time to rank them. Remember, we're taking into account how much each profession enhances player power and utility, how fun or cool it is, and how good it is for making gold. In D rank, I put First Aid. It doesn't really make any money and generally has few uses. In C rank, I put Enchanting, Fishing, and Leatherworking. Enchanting is cool, but really expensive. Leatherworking makes some good gear, but really most of the money is in getting the mats for that gear. And fishing takes a lot of time, and everyone can do it. In B rank, I place Tailoring, Blacksmithing, and Cooking. Cooking is useful and easy, and Tailoring and Blacksmithing both have some really good utility items, like the bags and keys, but have a limited lifespan. In A rank, I place Herbalism, Skinning, and Mining. Gathering materials around the world is a pretty fun and enjoyable way to break up the pace of the game, and can provide a really good amount of money on their own. So in S rank, I place Engineering and Alchemy. Engineering is amazing for player power and being fun, and Alchemy is amazing for profit, while also being good for power and utility. And between those two, which is the single best profession? I'd say Alchemy. And I'd pair that with Herbalism, of course. Alchemy makes you great money, and so does Herbalism if you just sell the mats as is. It's not quite as good as engineering in PvP, but it's still very good with its healing and movement potions. And in PvE, it's basically a requirement with flasks. Engineering has it beat in terms of style, but Alchemy is just too darn handy to deny. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want, let me know what your favorite profession is down in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe, those things would help me out a lot. And I will see you next week.